Okay, you have probably seen that Canon have released the new EOS R5 II, which is absolutely a wonderful hybrid mirrorless camera. In fact, I would probably go so far as to say it's one of the best cameras that you can buy right now. But how does it stack up against the original R5, and which one should you be looking at buying if I didn't give it away by what I just said? Now, I absolutely stand by what I just said about the R5 II being one of the best cameras that you can buy right now, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the R5 is still a really good camera. There's a lot to love about that, and you can still do a huge amount with it. It is a great hybrid option, and one of the biggest things to think about in this situation is the price as well, which we will get to. But let's start by looking at some of the key differences between these cameras. Now, the R5 II, I think it's fair to say, has had upgrades pretty much across the board, but they're not always immediately super obvious when you look at the camera and when you think about things like resolution. So to actually look at the two cameras side by side, they look pretty similar. There's a couple of minor changes. So the R5 II now has the on-off switch over on the right, which is a little bit easier if you want to turn it on one-handed. That is actually replaced on the top left by now a photo video switch, which is also better than the way you switch on the original R5, which is a bit convoluted, pressing the info button and moving over. I didn't love that, but you know, it's not the end of the world. You get used to it, but I do prefer the system on the R5 II. Otherwise, to look at them, they're very, very similar. The R5 II is a tiny bit bigger and a tiny bit heavier, but I think the reality is you would never actually notice it in the real world because it's just a few grams in weight and really a few millimeters in size. Now, inside the camera, they're both rocking a 45 megapixel sensor. So the resolution is the same. It is a new sensor on the R5 II. And while they are the same resolution, there are some serious differences in the way the camera then processes those images from the sensor. The actual processor in the R5 II is the brand new Digic X processor with the Digic X accelerator that we see in the R1 as well, whereas that's not in the original R5, which did have the new Digic X processor at the time and is still very good, but those two processors working side by side in the R5 II allow it to just be faster, both in terms of actual literal speed of shooting, which we'll get to in a second, but also just lots of things in camera that it's able to do. For example, you now have in-camera upscaling, so you can take one of those 45 megapixel images and upscale it. I think it's to about 180 megapixels total, which is quite a lot of detail. That allows you to really crop in if you want to do something like that. And you also have much better noise reduction options in the R5 II as well. That said, I'm going to be totally honest with you, you're going to be able to get beautiful images out of either of these cameras. You will see a slight improvement on the R5. You will see a little bit of an improvement with the R5 II, but the reality is the images out of the original R5 look so good as well. I think you'll be happy either way. Now, interestingly, or just on this note, the R5 on a firmware update had the pixel shift mode added in, where you could take one image and it would actually shift the sensor to really bring it up in detail. That would bring it up to about 400 megapixels, which is outrageous. As far as I can see, the R5 II doesn't have that mode. It's totally possible they'll add it as a firmware update at some point, but it may have been just replaced by the new upscaling in-camera mode that is available, which maybe is a bit more useful, to be honest, because you don't have to rely on the camera sitting perfectly still while it takes multiple images, moving the sensor, and puts them all together. So maybe it's a bit more of a useful thing. It's not 400 megapixels, but I think we can all probably live with 180 megapixels without too much of a problem. Now, those two processors in the R5 II also allow, like I say, for it to be a lot faster. So the R5 II can now shoot up to 30 frames a second, whereas the original R5 could only shoot 20 frames a second. Now, I say only, as if 20 frames a second is slow. That's still very good. That's still 45 megapixels, 20 frames a second. If you do like to dabble in wildlife, maybe some sports, something where you've got fast moving subjects, you might appreciate that bump. It's a 50% increase, to be fair, in speed. So 30 frames a second is very fast, but 20 frames a second is still really good on the original R5. Okay, let's talk about autofocus in these cameras, because this is an area where the R5 II is frankly pretty much top of its class. So the original R5 had the dual pixel CMOS AF that we've seen in a lot of Canon cameras over the last few years. And that works really well, right? It has got deep learning algorithms for subject detection. That seems to work really nicely. Eye detection, face detection. It can pick up animals as well. So cats, dogs, birds, vehicles as well. And it's certainly no slouch when it comes to autofocus. But the R5 II does have some pretty significant upgrades. So it has the latest iteration of Canon's autofocus system, which is called dual pixel intelligent autofocus. That has advanced tracking, including through obstacles, which is wild. So if your subject moves behind something or something else moves in front of them, it's able to estimate roughly where the head is and actually keep tracking them even as they move behind. And then obviously when they come back out, all good, it's still tracking them. It can pick up things like joints. It has the action priority mode that we've seen in the R1, where if you're shooting sports, you can tell the camera what sport you're shooting. And then if there's lots of people in the scene, it's able to work out who is most likely to be interacting with the ball, who is actually the one it should be focusing on. It draws little squares around everyone's faces, tracks them around the scene, and focuses on the right person. And it is outrageous to see it happening in real time. I loved shooting with it. I shot basketball with it, and it was amazing. The autofocus worked so well for that. Subject tracking is also improved, so it includes things like horses, planes, trains, insects. There's loads going on here, and I've got to say autofocus in these cameras has reached a point where it is just remarkable how well it works, and it just completely frees you up to think about framing, to think about actually moving the camera around yourself. It just works as a perfect tool for you as a photographer or a videographer. Now, of course, these cameras are absolutely hybrid cameras. They're video powerhouses, to be honest with you, and that's true of both of them. Now, of course, there are upgrades to the R5 II. So while both of these cameras can shoot in 8K, the R5 II can shoot 8K up to 60 frames a second. It can also do that in RAW in camera, whereas the R5 can shoot 8K, but we're talking 30 frames a second. Both of them can shoot 4K 120 frames a second, but where the original R5 has Canon log, the R5 II now has C-Log 2, it has log 3, 16 plus stops of dynamic range, loads of different codecs and ways to actually shoot, loads of flexibility there for the way you want to shoot video. It also matches in terms of color science and things like that with cameras like the C400. So if you want to use it as part of a wider production, maybe a B-Cam 2, an EOS Cinema camera, you absolutely can. You're not going to notice a difference between them when you come to put those videos into your timeline. It's also worth mentioning you have a full-sized HDMI port on the R5 II, whereas in the R5, it was micro HDMI. Now, do you care? Well, that depends on what you're using this camera for and what you're doing with it. But for a lot of videographers, that is actually quite a big deal. And one of the biggest things when it comes to the R5 II is how Canon have dealt with heat. This is a big deal because the original R5, you might remember, had a little bit of a problem when it came to overheating. And that doesn't seem to be the case with the R5 II. So the actual camera itself is better at dissipating heat just by itself, but there's also an optional grip that you can attach to it, which has a built-in fan. So if you do want to shoot 8K for a long period of time, you can do that now with this optional grip. And that actually allows you to shoot 8K 60p for 120 minutes. That's 2 hours before you start to run into overheating problems. Whereas the original R5, you're looking at about 20 minutes of 8K. And of course, that's not 60p either. That's a huge difference on what you're able to do with these cameras. And especially if you like to shoot video, I think that is massively worth considering because that's game changing. That's completely a different setup when it comes to what you're doing with these cameras. Now, both cameras have in-body image stabilization. To be honest, they're both very good. The R5 is up to 8 stops. The R5 II is up to 8.5 stops. I didn't really notice that much of a difference. It's already so good with the R5. Are you going to notice a massive difference? I think you're going to win either way here because both cameras, frankly, have some of the better image stabilization out there. Now, we've talked a bit about the bodies and how similar they actually are, but what about things like the EVF and the screen? Well, they both feature a very lovely 5.76 million dot OLED EVF, which can both run at 120 frames a second for a nice smooth refresh rate. And they both have the flip out 3.2-inch LCD screen as well. So no real differences there, but the R5 II does have eye control autofocus, which is a pretty big deal. Now, we first saw this on the R3, where it was actually really good. This is where you can essentially control where the autofocus point is by just looking at it through the viewfinder. You calibrate your eye, which takes about 30 seconds, and then you can really just control that by moving your eye around. And it's wild, and it works so well. And on the R5 II and the R1 actually, it's an updated version of this. It is improved, it's noticeable, it's very snappy, it's very quick, and it's very accurate as well. And once you set it up, it's a lovely way to shoot. It's not available for video yet, which in our review I said was a little bit of a shame. Who knows, maybe one day it will be, but for now, for stills, it's super useful. They also both take one CF Express Type B card and one SD card, so no real change there either. But probably one of the biggest differences and one of the most important differences is in the price. Of course, the R5 II has just come out, so at the moment you're looking at around £4,499, whereas the R5 is now available around £3,649 at the time of this video. So it might be different depending on when you're watching this, but that's about £850 difference, at least here in the UK, which is certainly worth being aware of and certainly worth taking into consideration, because you could definitely get yourself a nice lens with that kind of money, which is important to consider with cameras like this, because of course the camera is only going to be as good as the glass you put on the front of it. So I think with all that taken into consideration, the original R5 is still a very attractive hybrid camera, and especially if you shoot more stills than video, I think you're so unlikely to run into overheating problems on the still side. You can do a bit of video, still got loads of ways to shoot video as well. Great camera for lots of different things. Whereas the R5 II, I do think there's just upgrades across the board. It's a better design of camera with the heat situation. And if you are a hybrid camera, if you're shooting photo and video, I think there's enough here with the autofocus, with the video, and just the way it's set up. This is a lovely, lovely camera to shoot with. You could save a bit of money with the original R5 and you can get yourself a lens, but I think the R5 II is so future-proofed in what it can do that this is a camera that's going to last you for such a long time as a great tool of a camera. But let me know what you think. What are you more interested in, the original R5 or the new R5 II? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know why as well, because that's always super interesting. You can check out both the cameras as well by checking out the links down in the description. Don't forget to like, subscribe, as well as the new stuff all the time. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.